What's going on, y'all? It's Big Facts again coming at you with another video. So, we want to discuss, this Cuba SOS situation and really come down and figure out whether this is an issue of the U.S. sanctions placed on Cuba or another failure of communism. So, right now we're looking at the island country of Cuba. Cuba is about 90 miles from the U.S., as we all know. And it's a nation of over 11 million people, island nation. And, many people from Haiti, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, Mexico, Bahamas, and even the United States have had connections with, countries with a country like Cuba. So let's get down to it. So we go over here to the World Factbook. Let's see, people... over 11 million people as estimated as today, as we said, ethnic groups, white, mulatto, blacks, all that said and good. But, there's one issue that I have, with a lot of people when they talk about the Cuban economy. Yes, it is a socialist economy. However, things have been changing and people are saying it's a repressive government. The government's not allowing people to own things. They're pressurizing people, et cetera, et cetera. But from quick research, I found the Cuban regime, as stated here, the Cuban regime has updated its economic model to include permitting the private ownership and sale of real estate and new vehicles, allowing private farmers to sell agricultural goods directly to hotels, allowing the creation of non-agricultural cooperatives, adopting a new foreign investment law, and launching special development zone around the Mariel port. Wow. Even in the previous paragraph before that, the government has cut state sector jobs as part of a reform process, and it has opened up retail services to self-employment, leading to the rise of so-called, cuentapropistas, or entrepreneurs. More than 500,000 Cuban workers are currently registered as self-employed. This is from the CIA World Factbook about Cuba. So this isn't propaganda stuff. Now, we've seen slow economic growth, but we're going to get down into why we're seeing that. Last estimates of GDP growth, 1.6%. That was back in 2017. So obviously, relatively slow growth. And back in 2015, we seen growth speeding up, and that was around the time when I think Obama was normalizing relations with Cuba right before he left office. We see Cuba's GDP real growth rate was about 4.4%. Trump comes into office, things slow down. After the inputting of sanctions, we have 0.5%. Then a slight increase in 2017 to 1.6%. Inflation obviously beating them up right there, 5.5%. 4.5% in 2016, 5.5% in 2017. So, those things, who knows what they are today. But this is from the CIA World Factbook showing you. So what I want people to understand is this. When you look up the Helms Burton Act, let's look up the Helms Burton Act, everybody. Now, this was signed back in 1996 during the Clinton administration, okay? Clinton administration, this law was passed by the 104th United States Congress back in March 6, 1996, and enacted in law by 42nd President of the United States, Bill Clinton, on March 12, 1996. This bill, which had been tabled in late 1995 after Senator Helms, which is what the act was named after, was unable to overcome several Democratic filibusters. Was introduced, prompted an episode, etc. Cuban fighter jets shot down 2 private planes operated over Miami base for humanitarian international search and rescue support group Brothers to Rescue, Hermanos al Rescate, which had been on search to locate mission over international waters. Whether they were shot down over Cuban territory or international space is up for debate. But there's an interesting portion here if you read further. This law includes a wide variety of provisions intended to bring about peaceful transitions to representative democracy and the market economy in Cuba. Okay, This is what the law claims that it's intended to do. International sanctions against Cuban government, economic embargo, and any non-U.S. company that deals economically with Cuba can be subjugated to legal action, and company leadership can be barred from entry into the United States. Sanctions may be applied to non-U.S. companies trading with Cuba. This means that internationally operating companies have to choose between Cuba and the U.S., which is a much larger market. Boom. Right there, showing you that this sanction, laws like this that are enacted upon Cuba, basically handcuff the Cuban economy. They don't get to attract other investments because you're putting other international companies in a conundrum where they have to choose, hey, should we ignore the largest economy in the world, the United States, to help out and do business with this small island nation as Cuba? This is the situation that Cuba's facing. So how could they attract private investment? How could they attract other investors to come inside when the United States is wielding tactics like this by barring these other businesses from doing business with the United States if they don't comply with this? Do you guys not see the threat to the economic sovereignty of Cuba? Just right here in the law. Even goes on further, United States opposition against Cuba membership in international financial institutions. So basically blocking out Cuban officials or Cuban regulatory systems from operating in international financial institutions like banks, which help give loans, which help spur, further investments, gives money to the people. All these things are what's going on. And the United States is behind it. So for people to say that, oh, it's communism, look, Cuba's trying to open up. They're doing everything that they can to work in good faith. The United States is not working in good faith. Coupled with a pandemic to make things matters even worse, this is what's hurting people. It's not the repressive government. The government is trying to fight for its sovereignty. That's all they're trying to do. And the United States is just basically trying to destabilize that country, make everything go into complete chaos where the government cannot control, then having the people to oust out the government so that the place can just be in utter chaos and end up like Libya. And then U.S. could swoop in and other U.S. corporations could come in there, take control, and it'll be the Batista situation all over again in Cuba. That's exactly what's happening. That's exactly what's going on in there. And the writing is, all this stuff is for easy research that people can take the time to go out and find out. Even there's articles from the Financial Times. Biden shows he will wield U.S. financial systems as a foreign policy weapon. Look at it. That's April 17 of 2021. Not just against Russia, not just against Iran, but against anybody that the U.S. finds as a threat. Look at it. Biden shows he will wield U.S. financial systems as a foreign policy weapon. And if you guys don't understand, the implications of this, people need to realize that the U.S. dollar is the number one currency in the world. Number one most used currency in the world. All right? As you see here. But I left this page highlighted because I want people to understand the importance of using the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar is also an important factor in foreign exchange markets for other currencies, where it may act as a benchmark or target rate for countries that choose to fix or peg their currencies to the dollar's value. China, for instance, has long had its currency, the yuan or renminbi, pegged to the dollar, much of which disagreements of economists and central bankers. Quite often, countries will fix their currencies to the U.S. dollars to stabilize exchange rates, rather than allowing the free forex markets to drive the currency relative value. But here's a kicker. One other feature of the U.S. dollar is that it's used as a standard currency for most commodities, such as crude oil and precious metals. Thank you. No economy on this planet can run without obtaining commodities, energies such as oil and other precious metals. You need these things to run an economy. As we already know from the Helms Burton Act and things like that, Cuba is being blocked out of financial institutions. How else can you have access to U.S. dollars if you can't even do business with U.S. banks? They are blocking Cuba from operating with U.S. banks. and other countries too as well that rely or utilize U.S. banks. So that is why you see a lot of, the strict, harsh measures, the austerity measures that are taken in Cuba is because they're just trying to survive. They don't have the ability, to financially improve things or to attract investments because the United States is blocking that opportunity, with these strict measures of sanctions, the embargo, everything. They are making life harder for the Cuban government to help assist the Cuban people. And I respect the Cuban government because they're trying to fight, basically, this is a battle for their political sovereignty. They do not want to be, pawns or used or lose their sovereignty to just basically be the United States government's flunky. And all this is out there. This information is out there. And then with the whole shutdown due to the pandemic, look at the prices. This is the commodity index chart. Commodity index chart. The pandemic started around this time period, March, April 2020. And look at since then, commodity prices have increased, have continued to increase, and they're only getting higher. They are only getting higher. With inflation, everything going on, it's only getting higher. So you're going to see even more social unrest in countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, places that, are being blocked out from the financial markets, that find it hard to find access to US dollars. That is why they're advocating for de-dollarization. They do not want the US dollar as a world's reserve currency because the United States is basically playing, economic warfare with these countries. When you go to the UN, even US allies, the United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, etc., the only nation out of all the nations in the UN, the only two nations that argue or at least agree to continue the embargo on Cuba is the United States and Israel. Every other nation is saying what the United States is doing is wrong. They do not agree with that. Even right here, others' websites, what to know about doing business in Cuba. International trade with Cuba by the U.S. person is restricted. So for all those people, Cuban Americans that are saying that they can't send money home to their people, well, the U.S. government is doing it. They are restricting U.S. persons from doing international trade, or even this includes U.S. banks. So when you're trying to send money, involving yourself in international transactions, U.S. banks cannot facilitate that. And banks are the middlemen. You cannot send over money because of these sanctions. It even says it here. U.S. bank would trigger sanction liability for the U.S. So people have to realize this. Stop blaming, it's a government, the repressive government, when that government is basically trying to fight for their sovereignty. The people suffering in Cuba are a symptom. It's a result of what the United States is doing to the Cuban government by economically trying to punish them. But, I showed this right here with the de-dollarization because the United States wielding this tactic has got to see that people, members of the IMF, and especially other countries that are not involved in it, but all around the world are not using the US dollar. From 2000, where the US dollar was once 72% of the most used currency, now as of 2020 and even 2021, I think it's even dropped to 55%. Only 61% of the world's currencies or world people are using the dollar. And it's dropping. You see the advent of this is what fuels things like cryptocurrency. People are looking into the euro. I seen a chart the other day where the euro is actually slightly the most traded currency over the US dollar. So all these things matter, people. All these things matter. Stop blaming the Cuban government. The Cuban government is not perfect, just like any government in the world. It's not perfect. But they are doing their best, to at least control and maintain their sovereignty. Nobody wants to be another country's flunky or bully. And I understand why the United States is doing it, because throughout the world, you're seeing more and more trade being done with China, especially on the Western Hemisphere. And the United States is basically trying to hold on to it, controlling that. So all those that are saying it's a Cuban government, do some research on them. Find out why. They're probably one of those people who are basically, benefiting from poorer Cubans prior to the Castro regime. That seems to be the case a lot of the times. But doing a quick research on a lot of these things, like the Helms Burton Act, finding out how the Biden administration is using financial systems as a foreign policy weapon, learning about de-dollarization, looking about how you can do business in Cuba, seeing how commodities are purchased in dollars, and this is how the United States is able to control other nations that need commodities, because every nation in the world needs a commodity. They need those raw materials, which are sold in dollars. Looking at commodity prices continuously increasing by the day. All these things are out there. That's why the Cuban government's suffering. But people don't ever want to take, consideration when they want to talk about, what socialism does and, et cetera, about that the Cuban government was able to make strides. They had some of the highest literacy rate in the country. In the world, some of the highest literacy rates in the world. They were able to come up with their own COVID vaccine. Some of the best doctors come from Cuba. Infant mortality rate is better than in the United States. Way better. And this is for a country that's been lacking, any type of substantial economic trade. So you guys, go out there. The research is there. All of it is out there. Look at the literacy rate in Cuba. 99.8% of the total population can read. 99.8%. And you're telling me that, it's socialism. That's they're repressing the government. I don't know about a repressive government that wants to help educate the people. To me, I don't see how that's repression. But here in the United States, you see that type of repression through its history, where they didn't even want it, where a certain segment of the population wasn't even allowed to read, wasn't even considered human beings at one point. You know where I'm getting at with that? So people have to look at these things. This information is out there. So to conclude, when it comes down to who's really at fault on this, is it the sanctions or is it, the communist, or is it the Communist Party? I really have to say it's the sanctions. The sanctions, and then COVID just compounded matters. That's why you see, the Cuban government suffering as it is. And I won't be surprised that, there are some bad actors that are funding a lot of these Cuban Americans to post these videos out in Miami, basically showing Cubans suffering and saying that it's a Cuban repressive government, when they know the true bad actor is the United States not functioning in good faith. But I want to hear what y'all have to say. Like, comment, subscribe down below. I'm out.